United States government spent over $1 billion trying to destroy Pablo Escobar. What they never told you is that before they hunted him, they needed him. This is not the Narcos story. This is the story they buried. Pablo Emilio Escobar Gaviria was born on December 1, 1949 in Rio Negro, Colombia, the son of a farmer and a schoolteacher. Not a crime family, not a dynasty. A farmer's son from a country most Americans couldn't find on a map. He dropped out of school because his family couldn't afford to keep him in. His first crimes were embarrassingly small: stealing tombstones, sanding off the names, selling them back to grieving families, selling fake lottery tickets, smuggling stereo equipment across borders. This was the man who would one day be worth $30 billion. By the mid-1970s, he had figured out what Colombia was sitting on. The country was perfectly positioned, geographically and economically, to become the cocaine capital of the world. Bolivia and Peru grew the coca, Colombia refined it, and the United States consumed it. Escobar built the pipeline between all three. In 1976, he founded what would become known as the Medellín Cartel. His philosophy was brutally simple. He called it plata o plomo, silver or lead. Take the bribe or take the bullet. Judges, police chiefs, senators, generals, every institution in Colombia was either on his payroll or living in fear of him. At its peak, the Medellín Cartel controlled an estimated 96% of all cocaine entering the United States. 96%. 15 tons of cocaine shipped every single day. The cartel was generating around $420 million every week. That is not a typo. Every week. Escobar was so rich that he spent $2,500 a month just on rubber bands to bundle his cash. He reportedly wrote off 10% of his annual earnings as losses because rats were eating the bills in the warehouses where he stored money he literally could not spend fast enough. He built a private zoo at his estate, Hacienda Nápoles, filled with hippos, giraffes, elephants, and exotic birds. Those hippos still live in Colombian rivers today, invasive descendants of Escobar's wealth that the country still can't get rid of, decades after his death.
The world knows this part. What the world doesn't know is what was happening at exactly the same time in Washington. The year is 1979. The Soviet Union is expanding across Central America. Nicaragua has just fallen to the Sandinistas, a communist-aligned revolutionary movement that the United States views as an existential threat. The CIA is terrified. The Reagan administration is desperate. They need money, weapons, and logistics to fund the Nicaraguan Contra rebels, an anti-communist resistance group, and they need all of it hidden from Congress, from the public, and from history. Enter a man named Barry Seal. Barry Seal was a former TWA commercial airline pilot from Baton Rouge, Louisiana. By 1980, he was one of the most prolific cocaine smugglers in American history, running shipments for the Medellín Cartel from Colombia into the United States through a remote airstrip in Mena, Arkansas. At his peak, he was making up to $500,000 per flight. He once told associates he made $1.5 million on a single cocaine run. And Barry Seal was also working for the CIA. This is where it gets complicated, and where governments have spent decades trying to make the story disappear. What is confirmed, documented, and entered into congressional record is this: the CIA was aware of extensive drug trafficking by the Nicaraguan Contra rebels and did nothing to stop it. In August 1987, the chief of the CIA's own Central American Task Force testified before Congress that drug smuggling by the Contras was, in his words, not a couple of people, it is a lot of people. He added, "We knew that everybody around Pastora was involved in cocaine." The reason they looked away was coldly strategic. The CIA's priority was stopping communism. The drug trade was a revenue source for the Contras, and in the logic of Cold War Washington,
cocaine flowing into American cities was an acceptable price for keeping communism out of Central America. Now factor in Pablo Escobar. His son, Juan Pablo Escobar, later wrote under a pseudonym that his father worked for the CIA selling cocaine to finance the fight against communism in Central America. That claim has never been officially verified, but it sits alongside a documented reality. The Medellín Cartel's cocaine was moving through the same corridors, on the same planes, through the same networks that the CIA was using to funnel money and weapons to the Contras. Barry Seal was literally flying guns south and cocaine north. The CIA, by multiple accounts, turned a blind eye because Seal was also photographing Sandinista officials at Nicaraguan airstrips loading cocaine onto his planes. Reagan showed those photographs on national television as propaganda against Nicaragua's communist government.
The operation had two purposes simultaneously: fund the Contras and manufacture evidence against the Sandinistas. The cocaine flooding American cities was the mechanism for both. When the arrangement became politically dangerous, the CIA did what it always does. It disappeared. Barry Seal was left exposed, his cover blown. In February 1986, he was shot dead in a parking lot in Baton Rouge, a contract hit by the Medellín Cartel. 3 Colombian nationals were convicted of the murder. Whether the CIA simply allowed it to happen remains one of the most debated questions in American intelligence history. Escobar, meanwhile, was untouchable. In 1991, facing escalating pressure from the Colombian government, Escobar negotiated his own surrender on his own terms. He agreed to turn himself in only if he could be housed in a prison he designed and built himself. The Colombian government, terrified of what he might do if they refused, agreed. La Catedral, the prison Escobar built on a hilltop outside Medellín, had a nightclub, a sauna, a soccer field, a waterfall, computers, fax machines, and direct phone lines. He continued running his drug empire from inside. He continued ordering murders from inside. He held parties inside. He was not in prison. He was living in a fortified luxury compound with a government-issued armed guard for protection. When Colombian authorities finally decided to move him to a real facility in 1992, they arrived to find him gone. He had simply walked out. His guards had been his own men all along. The 18 months that followed were the bloodiest in Medellín's history. Escobar declared war on the Colombian state. He bombed shopping centers. He blew up civilian airliners. He put bounties on police officers, paying street kids to execute cops for cash. Over 4,000 people died in Medellín alone during the years of his conflict with the state. The entity that ultimately brought him down was not the DEA. It was not the U.S. military. It was a shadowy paramilitary group called Los Pepes, people persecuted by Pablo Escobar, made up of rival cartel members, former associates he had betrayed, and victims' families. They were armed, organized, and received what multiple investigators later described as covert material support from the CIA. The agency that had once tolerated his operation was now quietly funding the people hunting him.
On December 2, 1993, one day after his 44th birthday, Colombian security forces tracked Escobar to a middle-class neighborhood in Medellín. A gunfight erupted. He tried to escape across a rooftop. He was shot through the ear. Some Colombian officers claimed he fired the killing shot himself. His own family has long disputed how he died. What is not disputed, he died with one bodyguard and no money. The man who once spent a week hiding from government forces by burning $2 million in cash to keep his daughter warm died alone in a rented house, hunted by the country he had terrorized and the agencies that had once found him useful. His death did not end the cocaine trade. The Cali cartel simply filled the vacuum, then the Sinaloa cartel. The trade routes Escobar pioneered still exist today. The distribution networks he built were adopted by every organization that came after him. The hippos are still in the river.
Medellín has transformed itself into one of Latin America's most celebrated cities, a story of remarkable civic reinvention. But Escobar's face is still on coffee mugs, on t-shirts, on murals. Tourists still visit his grave. His childhood home is a museum. Netflix turned his life into a show watched by hundreds of millions of people worldwide. He was a monster who killed thousands of people, and the world made him into entertainment. That is, perhaps, the most disturbing part of this entire story. Not the CIA, not the cocaine, not the corruption. The fact that we cannot stop watching. Pablo Escobar did not just build a drug empire. He revealed something about every institution he touched, about the governments that used him, the banks that laundered his money, the media that glamorized him, and the audiences that made him famous. The throne always falls, but sometimes the people who built it never answer for what they did.